Start recording. Okay, so yeah, let's start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Project Management Professional Free Course. Today we are going to talk about few items, which are project life cycle, project management process, project management tutorials, project management methodologies, and finally, questions and answers. Now talking about life cycle. As you can see here, project life cycle, it would have like start the project, you do a bit planning, then you actually execute the activities. And then you end the project. Now this process group will be a part of this process of the project. Because of planning, we'll have to initiate the planning activities. We'll have to actually do the planning, then we have to execute the plan and so on. So that means it's going to be a part of this. There are like 10 knowledge area, right? So for example, communication management, stakeholder management, sport management, risk management, and so on. So we'll cover each and every of this knowledge area with many examples and actual artifacts as a set, okay? Then there will be a phase gate, okay? Like we took one example here, project phase timeline. Okay, so this cover everything that I'm supposed to be covering as a part of a PMBOK guide. So we have project life cycle, we have product life cycle. We'll just quickly take a look at this. So project life cycle will have these phases as we already spoke about. So we have a feasibility analysis, design implementation, and so on. This phase is, you could name them based on the industry that you are working on. And this phase is the whole idea of working in this phase is basically that I am or I can look forward to some milestone at the end of the phase. So when I complete feasibility, I would know that whether it is possible to continue working on this project or not. For example, the product that I will be working on, whether there would be market available or not, as about of the feasibility studies. Whether the solution that I will building would it feasible to build the solution or not. So all this feasibility studies I would do from the point of view of whether it is all possible to make the product or not, okay? So all that I would do, again, technical feasibility, business feasibility. So all of these aspects will be covered as a part of that. To sum up, as you can see here, for each project, we have 4 phases. We have a pre-project work, starting the project, organizing and preparing and carrying out the work, and finally completing the project, okay? And at the end of each phase, we have something called phase gate. Okay, this is very, very important, guys. Okay. As I said, project life cycle is based on the industry that you are working in. If it is just an example, if it is a software industry, then typically your project life cycle would be like requirement gathering, phase analysis, design development, testing, implementation. There are the phases that we go through. Okay. The same for it will be different in construction. Okay, will be different in industry. So it depends on the industry that you are working on, which could be different. But at high levels, these phases will give us some framework to work through, and we can on achieving the milestone. And most importantly, these phases will help us in establishing the project governors as well. Okay, So these phases could be done by two ways. Okay, can be done like sequentially, which means I finish phase 1, then I start phase 2. After finishing phase 2, I start phase 3. Okay, or I can do it overlapping. What I mean by overlapping, I mean I can start phase 2 when phase 1 is still continue. Okay, so it depends on the phase that you are working on. And if you are doing the overlapping, then it's also called as a fast tracking. Okay, sometimes in the exam, it said overlapping or it said fast tracking. So it's the same meaning. Okay, so there are concepts like fast tracking and crashing. So we will be covering this concept as a part of your training. So stay tuned. Okay. I'm sure it would be happy to know that there are two different ways through which we can actually move the projector a little bit faster. Okay, so by doing this fast tracking or crashing or overlapping, so what is fast tracking and what is crashing the project is what we'll be covering as we proceed. Okay, so now we're just covering about the project. So project can be sequential or can be overlapping. Okay, later we'll discuss about overlapping in more details. Okay. So now let's also quickly talk about the product life cycle and try to understand what is projects and the product life cycle very quickly. Now understand one thing. The project life cycle could be a multiple project life cycle within the product life cycle. So once you have a product, right, this a product life cycle, you can undertake multiple projects. But when you create a product for the first time, so you have one such a product which you have undertaken to launch that product, right, guys? So the same example, if we have to continue, so let's say you have launched or you have kickstarted the project to come up with a cheaper car in the market. So that was your idea, okay? And then you start your project. You had gone through different phases of the project, and then you introduce that car here. So you have taken up one project here, and then your outcome is, of course, the product that you are launching, and then the product life cycle starts here. So a product life cycle typically goes through different phases. So you have introduction phase. So the car is there in the market, and then this is cheapest car. So for of course he is got a sales. Then you are in a growth phase, and then after a few years, you realize that because there is a competition or other cars are also coming up, and because even other have starting realizing this market, so then the maturity level is what slowly the product start achieving. This is where you are selling at peak, and then because of competition, the sales start declining, right? And then gradually you stop enhancement on the product. And then you just sell whatever is selling, and then that's how that product ends. But during this entire product life cycle, you might do multiple projects. So for example, you are enhancing the car by doing the multiple projects. So you are doing the facelifting of the car, right? Or you are doing complete makeover, or you're actually doing changes. You are doing in the engine when you are at the growth phase. You are actually undertaking a project wherein you would like that car to be maybe do some sort of changes so that it will appeal to young crowd, young generation, depending on your marketing strategy. Depending upon what is driving this growth, you would undertake multiple projects. So you have taken up a project and the outcome is the cheapest car. that you are launching in the market. And now we have product lifecycle started. And within that product lifecycle, there are a number of phases that you have going through. And then you are undertaking multiple projects within the product lifecycle in order to ensure that you keep up the sale of the product as much as possible. So that's typically the difference between the product and the project lifecycle. Okay, guys? So one more time, what's the difference between project and the product lifecycle? So within product lifecycle, you can, or you may have one project lifecycle or 2 or 3 or 4. Okay? All right. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is about understanding the types of development cycles. This is very important. I'm sure some of you may have already read about this life cycles. Some of you may have worked on different life cycles in their project. So we will just touch about all these different types of life cycle, and I will also try to give you some examples, and we will try to also take some specific examples. Okay. So you may have come across a different life cycles like predictive life cycle or adaptive life cycle. All and in fact, there are a combination. So sometimes predictive and adaptive way of working is combined, and then it becomes hybrid. Okay, hybrid life cycle. We also build it in iterative. Okay, iterative and incremental way. So we have iterative and incremental life cycle as well. Okay, so we have predictive, we have adaptive, we have iterative, we have incremental. Okay, so let's start with predictive life cycle. Okay, predictive life cycles in the exam as well. We can say it as a plan driven. Okay, we can say it as traditional way. We can say it as a waterfall. Okay, so in the exam, predictive means plan driven, means waterfall, means traditional. Okay. So typically what happens in predictive life cycle, you will agree that the best example of predictive life cycle is waterfall. Because in waterfall life cycle, what happens is that, for example, if you want to build a house, okay, we always do the upfront planning. So we spend a good amount of time in gathering requirements, in defining the scope of front, and based on that scope that we have defined, we come up with the schedule. Okay, how much time this project would take to complete this house. Okay, we also drive the cost that is required to complete a project. So that means all these activities we do upfront, and therefore it is a predictive way of working. So the best example is the waterfall life cycle, where we do upfront planning, and then we have these different phases through which we actually grow through in order to build that house. So there are different phases that we talked about as a part of waterfall life cycle. Another example, like the software. Okay, you are starting with, we initiate a project, then we spend good amount of time in gathering requirement, then we do analysis of this requirement, and based on the analysis, we start working on design part. And on design, again, we create high-level design, low-level design, and so on. And then we start actually build activities, and then we test the software, and then it is deployed for use. So that means all these activities are actually planned well in advance. So it's absolutely a predictive way of working or developing that software product, and therefore it is pretty clear life cycle, waterfall life cycle. Okay, so one more time, for predictive life cycle or plan driven, or waterfall or traditional. So we did everything step by step. So start with requirement, and then design, and then implementation, and then testing, and finally maintenance. So we did everything step by step. Okay. Also, you can see here the scope is very clear, right? Because you start collecting the requirements. So the scope is very known at the beginning of the project. Okay. Another type of life cycle that we can talk about is called agile, okay, or adaptive life cycle. Okay, one more time here for the exam. Sometimes it's called adaptive, sometimes it's called change driven, sometimes it's called agile. Okay, all the same meaning. Okay. So agile, this is going to be definitely different than like the predictive way of working. So here the detail scope is defined, but that's defined typically for a particular iteration. So now this iteration is nothing but a specific duration that we are talking about. The duration of iteration could be anywhere, okay, between 1 to 4 weeks. Okay, so you may define that in the beginning of your project itself. So let's say in your project you all agreed as a team that you would like to have iteration duration of, like, for example, 2 weeks. Okay. So what you will do is that in adaptive life cycle, you will define the scope of the product that you are building for that 2 weeks, not for the whole project, just for this iteration. Okay. So whatever that you think you could within these 2 weeks, you identify that as a scope, and then you agree to this. Okay. So that means you build those features within 2 weeks in the iteration that is agreed like as a team. And again, the next iteration, you will pick up next setup requirement or feature, or by this way, you will actually go on building the software. Now, the advantage over here is that we have got multiple feedback cycles. Because by the end of every iteration, we go back to the customer and ask, what is good in it? Okay, you like the project or not? You like the product or not? You have any comments to modify? Okay, what could be improved? So that means we get to adapt as per the requirement or as per the changes that are given by the customer. And for that reason, this is a change-driven life cycle or adaptive life cycle. Okay, and this is typically used even on the agile project as well. Okay, one more time. For adaptive life cycle or change-driven life cycle or agile life cycle, we have different iterations. Okay, and for each iteration, it's from 1 week to 4 weeks. Okay, and for each iteration, we have a specific scope or we have a specific goal. Okay, and the advantage of this adaptive life cycle, we can get feedback from the customers and we can modify our project or our plan. Okay, and adjust any changes that is required from the customer. Okay. Okay. Now there is also a hybrid way of working where we do a bit upfront planning and we also respond to changes. So hybrids mean we have combined between predictive life cycle, which is waterfall, and the adaptive life cycle, which is agile. For agile, we can respond to changes. We can make modification based on the requirements of the customers. And from predictive life cycle, we have upfront planning for all the projects. That's why it's called the hybrid. It's like mix between predictive and adaptive. So hybrid life cycle is a combination of predictive life cycle and adaptive life cycle. wherein we are doing a bit of planning. Maybe it is 1 year projects, and we are doing better for planning for 3 months. And then you are also building iteratively, incrementally at the same times. We are showing the demo to the customer, taking feedback, and then building or responding to the changes that are suggested by the customers in the upcoming iteration. So this way, what is happening is that you are not only doing the upfront planning, but also you are responding to the changes or the suggestion, which is given by the customer. So this is truly a hybrid way of working, and for that reason, it is called as a hybrid life cycle. Okay. Now moving on to the next life cycle, which is iterative. So as far as the project scope is concerned, we determined the project scope early in the project life cycle. And what typically happens in iterative life cycle is that we have these iterations. So development happens within the iteration, and then we go and building the product in small chunks. Okay, we pick up a small chunk of the product, we build that in iteration, and again we move on to the next iteration. Okay, we build the next set of features. So this is how we kind of go in building. Okay, over the increments that are produced out of this iteration is a successful fashion incrementally when we work in incremental life cycle. What happened is basically, again, deliverables here are produced through a series of iteration. So in both the cases, you will find one thing in common is iteration. So iterative life cycle, we build in cycles. Okay. Again, focus on the keywords. Okay. For the question in the exam, just focus in keywords. So for the keywords, if you find something like called iterative or you say something like build in cycles, so this means we are in iterative life cycle. Okay. However, in incremental life cycle, we build on the previous chunk, or we build on the previous incremental of the product. So one more time, for the exam, just focus on the keywords. If it mentioned in the question like increment, okay, so that means we are in incremental life cycle. If it mentioned something like iterative, so it means iterative life cycle. If it mentioned it will be upfront planning, so it means we are in predictive. If it mentioned we are working in some iteration, and for each iteration we have 4 weeks, and we get some feedback from customers, so we are talking about adaptive. So just focus on the keywords so you can find the answer very easy. Okay. 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 So to sum up, we have 5 life cycles. We have 5 different ways of life cycles. We can have predictive life cycle, we can have agile life cycle, we can have hybrid, which is mixed between predictive and agile, we can have iterative, we can have incremental. What the difference between 5 approaches? For a predictive life cycle, the requirement is fixed, so we can do upfront planning. But for agile, we get feedback from the customer to modify the project or to modify the plan, whatever. Okay. For iterative, we are repeated until correct. But for incremental, we have frequent small deliveries. So we have like 3 iterations, 4 iterations. For each iteration, we have deliverable at the end. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. let's continue. Okay. Now, if you see phase gates, what is a phase gate? Okay. So we actually working in phases. We are talking about a project, right? So project will happen through different phases of the project. And as a part of the phase gate, what typically happens is that the project performance is always compared with what is documented in different project documents. You will come across documents like business case, okay, under the project management plan or benefits management plan, and we created certain things. We may have put up a milestone of the project over there, or we may have put up half, okay. The benefit would be realized on this project once we deploy it in production. Once my customers starting using this project, so I need to then compare the performance of the project with what is mentioned in this document. So as a part of the phase, that's what I do typically, and these things actually help me in taking certain decisions, which of course take the example, but for now we will do, let's take like very quick example of a project charter or project management plan. So you may have put up this as a part of the project management plan, that you would be completing your requirements gathering, the start date and the end date, and what you will get as the output is requirement specification document. So this is what you have agreed as a part of your project management plan under scope management activities. So when you proceed working on the project, we look back and check as a part of the project performance, whether we completed the requirement phase or not. And when we completed the requirement phase, whether my requirement specification document has it been created, has it been approved by the stakeholder or not, and based on the overall progress. Then we make certain decision, like for example, whether to continue to the next phase. So if in case, depending upon, yeah, like again, in which phase you are working. So if it is a feasibility phase that you are at, so you just write some like project ideas, and then you started working on these ideas, and you are doing the feasibility, whether can we convert this idea or not. We can sell this product in the market or not. So at visibility stage itself, you realize that this can be materialized, maybe because of certain reason. So then you may decide to not to continue ahead of it. Right? So this decision are taken based on the phase gate. Another decision could be continue to the next phase. So if your idea is going to work, if it is visible to be implemented, then you might just work on a business case, okay? And they will just start working on the project. So you have just decided that let's just continue working on that project, and let's move on the next phase, where we actually create a business case and the benefit management plan, and then the sponsor will create that, and then we will hand it over to the project manager, who will be then work on the project charter, or sometimes this year could be to the end of the project. So at the middle of the project, at times of the business objective itself had its changes, then at times it could be also be I did to end the project, and then there is itself, for example, there was some regulation, okay, you do which we started working on a project. However, we realized that that regulation itself is now more now valid, and we don't need to now to book or do any changes which were triggered as a part of that regulation, or maybe the compliance activities, so we could just end the project then, and therefore itself, or we could just like remain in the phase. Okay. So if you are in requirements, and if you are behind the schedule, or if you are not able to achieve what you have put up as a part of the plan, then you might need then extend, or might you agree to extend the plan as well. Or you could also repeat the phase. You could like extend it, you could repeat it. So this kind of decision are taken based on the phase gate that we agreed and that we have put them in these documents. These are the project documents, and they are definitely very, very important. Okay, guys? So one more time for the phase gate, sometimes in the exam is called kick-off point. Okay? For the question, it can say phase gate, or it can say kick-off point. Okay? So for the phase gates, at the end of each phase, we have something called the phase gate. As a phase gate, we just like review what we are done in this phase, if we implement everything correctly, if we are following the plan or not. Okay. If everything is okay, we will start for the next phase. Okay. So the phase gate, or the kick-off point, is the point which is at the end of each phase. Okay, guys? Okay. So moving on to the project management process. Okay. So let's understand first what is a process. And I'm sure you must have working on number of process. And if you are, if you actually see the typical, whenever we work on a process, we always come across there are some activities that are mentioned in a process, and we have to perform those activities one by one. And these activities are interdependent on each other. Whenever we work on any process, there is always a predefined objective that we try to achieve, right? So if it is a requirement gathering process, there is a predefined, okay? After that, by the end of this process, I should be able to produce a requirement specification document, which will then be analyzed in order to create a design of the product which I am working on. So there is always some predefined objective. Like whenever we even start working on a project, there is some objectives that we have on mind. It could be that's the product or results and outcomes that we talked about. So that's the process. You take any process, you would always find this here, those texts of process. So whenever we work on any process, we always have few things that we need to really take into consideration. Like they would always be some inputs, right, to the process. Where we work on a process, we need to refer to some of these inputs. Then we always use certain tools and certain techniques which actually help us in working through that process by efficient way. And we always have some outcome or outputs. So which is a certain output that we get at the end of the process. Okay. So any process, we have inputs, we have tools and techniques, and we have outputs. So from there, we are going to actually move on to a bit of different topic, which is tailoring. Okay, tailoring. Okay. Now this topic has been introduced as a part of the 7 editions PMBOK guides. I completely appreciate the fact that BMI has decided to put this topic as a part of the 7th edition book. The reason is that as a project manager, there is very important. There is where we get an opportunity through implement and practice the knowledge and the skills that we have learned over the period of time, telling what do we do typically in this tailoring. So this is the area where we actually select and appropriate process tools, inputs, outputs, choose life cycle based on the kind of the project that I am working on. So it could be also depends on the kind of project constraints. I will be coming across all kinds of governors' expectation on the project. So project manager is the one who will be doing this. And for that, project manager need to collaborate with multiple stakeholders in order to ensure that the process is tailored based on these factors that's just discussed. So every organization will have their own project management methods to suit them and provide additional tailoring guidelines for individual projects and bigger the organization. I have seen like complexity goes up, and especially there is a lot of demand, there is a lot of need from the governor's point of view. So if you don't manage or if you don't tell the governors your process well, you might land up getting into a trouble. So it's very important that you need to alert the process based on the kind of projects that you are working on and based on the constraints that you are handling and kind of governors requirements that you would have in your project. So to give you an example, let's say we were working on a project wherein the complexity is very high because there are multiple stakeholders involved. Not only that, they will be stakeholders involved from different time zone as well. So we had to use certain tools which will help us in ensuring that all the stakeholders are collaborating well, because that was our biggest challenges. And hence we started using a tool in which is actually a FIDI conference, and that helped us in ensuring that even so our team members and the stakeholder actually are distributed, but still we were able to perform the task very smoothly. And we have to make use of different tools, as I mentioned, like FIDI conference. As far as the collaboration is concerned, we have to use, of course, the FIDI conference movie. So we can like make a meeting online. Like we have different stakeholders from Canada, from United States, from Pakistan. So we can all communicate by using FIDI conference. And you know, some of these tools which actually help us in coming together during the eatings and the discussion at the same times. Even if you are working out of some time zone where there is like no overlap happening, but still whatever the activities that you have completed are always updated, so that when other person start working, the other person would know what all things that person is supposed to start working on. So this kind of a tailoring really helps us ensuring that we sell smoothly. Even the complexity in the project was a bit on the tight side, especially with respect to the distributed stakeholder. So this is like just a quick example, but as we go ahead in this course, we have taken some more examples, and based on the context, we have actually discussed out some scenarios as well, and what we could use work together. Okay, guys? Okay, now let's understand about the project management process and its scope. So as I mentioned, the project management, as far as the project management institute is concerned and the project management professional is concerned, so there are certain process group that you may have read somewhere, or if in case you have already started reading about the book or the PMBOK, probably you may have already read about these 5 different process groups, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and final closing. There are the 5 process groups that we have as a part of the book, the 7th edition book. So, for example, initiating would have 2 processes. Okay. For planning, we have 24 processes. For executing, we have 10 processes. For monitoring and controlling, we have 12 processes. And for coding, we have 1 process. And remember, for each process, we have inputs, we have outputs, we have tools and techniques. Okay. Okay, so for example, we initiate a project, then we do planning, and then we execute, and then we monitor and control, and finally we close it. Okay. This is called as a domains of a project management. Okay. But actually, this process group will be a part of each and every phase. So for each phase, we have different process, and for each process, we have inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques. So for example, if you take a phase, let's say like requirement gathering is a phase. So we initiate a requirement gathering, then we do planning about how we going to do, or how are we going to gather requirements. Then we execute. Okay, that means we actually go and maybe do interview, or we run surveys, or we do like focus group exercise and so on. So that execution part of it, and throughout this, we also monitor and control, because we have a requirement management plan, right? Or we have a scope management plan, and we see how whether we are performing as per the plan or not. So we have a monitoring and controlling happening as well. And once we complete, then we close, which is nothing, but we actually look for what the output. Did we get as a part of the requirement management process? So maybe you have got a requirement management plan and so on. So then you are good to close the process. So this is just like a very quick example, but you must have realized that all this process group can fit into each of these process, each of the phases. I mean to say, so there are not phases, but there are just the domains, and this fits into different phases. We also have knowledge area. So initially, there are 9, but how we have embarked guides in fact, the previous edition itself added that new knowledge area, which is stakeholder management. So we have 10 knowledge area. Okay. Now we have got 10 knowledge area. So starting with integration management is one of the biggest, in fact, amongst this 10 knowledge area. Then we have scope management, schedule management, cost management, quality management, resource management, communication management, risk management, procurement management, and finally, stakeholder management. So as you can see here, the different processes belong to this knowledge area, and I will give you another view which will also help you in getting a fair idea. So I am sure this must have given you a fair idea about what will we have to study as a part of the exam. Okay, guys? As a part of the examination, we have to study how this process have this technology area and 49 process. Okay, there are interlinking, and we need to also go through all of this process, and we need to understand them one by one. As far as this training is concerned, this training is organized by knowledge area. Okay. So today we'll talk about one knowledge area, and next week we'll talk about like 2 or 3 knowledge area, and so on. So you'll find each and every model in this training is based on the knowledge area. So we will starting with, for example, integration management, right? Then we will moving on to scope management and so on. So there are different modules on this training in which are based on the knowledge area. Okay. So we have just saw a bit on process groups and knowledge area. Now let's talk a bit about the process, the different process that we just saw here. We are like 49 of them. Now there are a few things that are just wanted to highlight about them. So we'll find this process, which sometimes there are just only once or at a predefined point kind of in the project example, could be project charter or closed project or phase. So if you see the project, so once you create a project charter in the beginning of the project, then you just keep on referring to that. You don't have to unless there is impact, you don't modify it. But of course, you go on modifying it if in case there is an impact. But once you have it for the whole project, and that's something which you kind of empower you as a project manager and both to give you an authority to use all the resources that are required in the project. Now, even the crowds project, if you see there is only one process, that's it. So it just used during the last phase, which is nothing but closing the project. You will find there is a certain process which are performed one by one. Okay. Okay. This point is very important. As I mentioned earlier, as well the project business case and the project management plan, this couple of documents which are developed by the sponsor and where the project manager responsibility will come into picture is online project plan or business case or benefit management plan. Even for that matter, the project success measures organization goal, and most importantly, tolerated some of these documents so as to align the program business case, and that's where the project manager come into a picture in order to establish that overall aligned or overall alignment to the business case, because that business case and benefit management plan is the most important document. And from the business point of view, so whatever the activities that are performed on the project needs to be aligned to that, so that in turn it will help you achieve the ultimate objective of the business, and that's where the project manager comes into picture. Now we will also take a look at the interrelationship of how the need is assessed and some of the critical business project documents. Now this is important from a high level point of view as a project manager. Sometimes I have seen that not everybody has this view, but good to have this view. So as I mentioned, some need assessment may have done based on which business case gets triggered, and then business management is created. So if you take a simple example, let's say you are working in some service line or some line of business, and suddenly you decide that you want to move digital, okay? So there is some needs assessment that must have done that all the competitors that are digital, and it's important that we also need to move on a digital platform. So that's a needs assessment that is done. Then you create the business case. So if you have to move to digital, what kind of business is how much, what are the options, what are the different options that are available, and what is the best possible option, what kind of benefit would be get. Once we implement the solutions that we have chosen, can be then captured as a part of the benefit management plan. So once this is agreed as a business side, then we these two documents are prepared by the business sponsor. The sponsor will work on the business case and the benefit management plan and give it to the project manager. The project charter is also prepared and given to the project manager because then project manager is authorized to use different resources on the project at the same time. He is then engaged on the project. So actual project activities will kickstart from once the project charter is in place on Word. So before that, whatever the activities that happens are basically categorized under the pre-project work. So right from that idea generation or submit assessment to coming up the business case, or for that matter, then writing business benefit plan, all these are nothing but the pre-project work, okay? All of these are pre-project work. Now this three project work is important because it is the one that will trigger the project. And then once we have a project charter in place, then we kickstart the project activities. So then we will come across different the preparation part of the project. So you would also work on the project management plan based on the project charter, and then you would typically carry out your execution of the project management plan activities. And once you complete all the phases, then you will close it. Okay, so this is how typically some of the key documents would fall in through these different phases and through the project lifecycle. Okay, guys, so we have pre-project work, starting the project, organizing, preparing, carrying out, and completing. Business case and the business management plans are in the pre-project work. Before start the project, we have the project charter. And once we have the project charter, we can start the project management plan. Okay. Okay. Okay.